In the quiet town of Villisca, Iowa, 1912, life carried a rhythm of predictable simplicity. The streets were lined with modest houses, wooden sidewalks creaked beneath the boots of townsfolk, and the aroma of fresh bread drifted from the local bakery each morning. But in the early hours of June 10, a darkness descended over one seemingly ordinary home on 6th Street, an evil that would etch its name into history and haunt generations to come. The Josiah Moore family had lived in the house for several years, respected in the community for their diligence and modesty. Josiah, a carpenter with a steady hand and quiet demeanor, had raised his 4 children with care alongside his devoted wife, Sarah. That evening, like so many others, the household retired to bed after supper. The air was heavy with summer warmth, and a faint breeze stirred the curtains. Yet, behind the closed doors, an unseen presence lurked, poised to turn a peaceful home into a scene of unimaginable horror. The next morning, neighbors began to notice an unusual stillness. There was no sound of children at play, no clatter of Josiah's workshop tools. Concerned, some approached the house, tapping lightly on the windows and calling out. It was Clara Moore, the eldest daughter, who usually welcomed morning greetings from neighbors, but now, the house remained silent. Inside, the scene was one of chilling devastation. The bodies of 6 people lay lifeless. Josiah and Sarah Moore had been struck down in their beds, the familiar comfort of home transformed into a chamber of death. Their children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Ina, were also victims, their small bodies still nestled in their blankets as if the night had swallowed them whole. But there were 2 others, Lena and Ina Stillinger, visiting cousins who had stayed the night. The axe, left with brutal finality in the corner of the room, reflected the morning sun, its blades stained dark. The town was thrown into chaos. Villisca had never witnessed a crime of such magnitude, and the sheer randomness of it sparked fear and suspicion. How could someone enter a house so quietly, commit such atrocities, and leave without a trace? Residents whispered of shadows glimpsed in windows, strange figures seen on the street late at night, and an unsettling stillness that lingered even after the bodies were discovered. Investigators arrived promptly, though forensic science in 1912 was rudimentary. They noted that the killer had taken care to cover footprints, leaving the house appearing undisturbed aside from the horrifying carnage. All doors were locked from the inside, yet no key had been forced. The methodical nature of the crime suggested someone who had been patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly composed. But who, and why? The initial theory focused on revenge or a vendetta. Josiah Moore had been a businessman, occasionally embroiled in disputes over land and local contracts. Yet, nothing in his recent dealings pointed to such an extreme response. Some suggested a wandering lunatic, driven by impulse or madness, but the precision with which the murders were carried out hinted at planning, not chaos. Theories swirled like smoke in the small town, none fully satisfying the restless minds of those seeking answers. Eyewitness accounts were scarce and often contradictory. A few residents reported seeing a man in the area during the night, his features obscured by darkness and distance. Some described him as tall, with a hat pulled low, moving with unnatural stealth. Others spoke of shadows that seemed to linger too long, corners of the house that felt alive, as if the walls themselves had witnessed the tragedy. Despite exhaustive questioning, no clear suspect emerged. The crime scene itself became almost a character in the story. The Moore house, once cheerful with the laughter of children, seemed to pulse with residual dread. Visitors reported a sense of being watched, cold spots that moved with the angles of the floorboards, and an oppressive silence broken only by the occasional creak of wood. Journalists who covered the story often lingered too long, noting a feeling of eyes following them down empty hallways. Even the townsfolk who lived nearby claimed they could not enter without an inexplicable chill crawling down their spines. Speculation about the motive was rampant. Some theorists believed the killer had a personal grudge, while others suggested darker impulses, ritualistic or psychological forces beyond comprehension. The fact that the murders occurred on a Sunday night, in a house full of family and visiting relatives, gave an almost sacrilegious undertone to the crime, as if the perpetrator sought not just death, but desecration of domestic sanctity. Authorities initially suspected local residents with known tempers or criminal records. Reverend George Kelly, a nearby preacher, noted in his diary that evil has walked our streets and entered our homes with an audacity that chills the soul. Yet, even careful scrutiny of local men with possible motives yielded nothing conclusive. The town turned on itself, suspicion and fear infecting daily life. Neighbors eyed one another with mistrust, doors were bolted at night, windows shuttered, and children kept indoors. One of the most haunting aspects was the apparent lack of struggle. The more children and their cousins were found as though they had been lulled into sleep, never sensing the danger approaching. Some investigators later speculated that the murderer may have used an unusual form of cunning, perhaps knocking on the door first, gaining trust, or exploiting the children's innocence. Yet no one could prove it. It was as if the house itself had conspired to conceal the approach of death. In the weeks that followed, suspicion fell upon several individuals, most notably a man named Frank F. Jones, a local businessman with prior altercations involving Josiah Moore. He was interrogated extensively, yet alibis and lack of evidence prevented any charges. Another suspect, Reverend Kelly himself, was considered, though the idea seemed unthinkable and was eventually dismissed. The possibility of a transient killer was also explored. Iowa's railways brought many strangers through small towns, but no concrete leads were discovered. Despite the intensity of the investigation, the case slowly faded from headlines, though not from memory. Families in Villisca slept less soundly. Shadows on the walls became more pronounced in the flickering lamplight. The Moore house changed hands several times over the decades, yet the sense of lingering presence persisted. Visitors would claim to hear whispers, soft footsteps, and sometimes the echo of children giggling in empty rooms. Paranormal investigators later noted inexplicable temperature drops and recording anomalies, though skeptics dismissed these claims. Legends began to intertwine with fact. The murders, though documented meticulously in newspapers, grew into stories of spectral figures and haunted nights. Some claimed that the axe itself seemed to call from its resting place, a remnant of the violence it had wrought. Others swore that the house retained echoes of the family's final moments, replaying in the quiet darkness of night. While these tales were unverifiable, they contributed to a growing mythology surrounding Villisca, cementing the murders in the American consciousness as one of the most chilling unsolved crimes. Psychologists and criminologists have studied the case extensively, speculating on the mind of the killer. The careful planning, apparent knowledge of the household, and extreme violence point toward a psychopathical profile. Yet without evidence or confession, these remain theoretical exercises. The truth is locked within the walls of 6th Street, preserved in shadows that have endured for more than a century. Even today, the house stands, or at least, a version of it, retaining a grim fascination for visitors and historians alike. Tours of the home recount the story with reverence and trepidation, often ending with a somber warning: some doors, once opened, never truly close. And in Villisca, the wind through the trees and the whisper of leaves along the street seem to carry fragments of that dreadful night, as though the past refuses to be silent. The Villisca axe murders remain unsolved, a dark testament to human cruelty and the fragility of domestic peace. It is a story of ordinary lives extinguished, of a community left in fear, and of the persistent shadows that linger where justice could not reach. Whether the killer was a local man with grudges, a wandering madman, or a figure lost to history entirely, the house on 6th Street bears witness to their crimes. And perhaps, in the quietest hours of night, when the world holds its breath, the echoes of that fateful June night return, reminding all who listen that some horrors are eternal.